doors are closed, so we can get started. Hello, everyone. If you have no idea where you are, you came here sleepwalking, I don't know. This is Steam It Up, Steampunk in Publishing, and yeah, welcome. So to start introductions, I'll be moderating the panel. My name is Diana Pho. I'm also known in the steampunk community as Ay-leen the Peacemaker. I run the multicultural steampunk blog Beyond Victoriana, and I moonlight, or in my day job, I am a blogger for Tor.com. I'm also an editor for Tor Books. And today I have the absolute pleasure of being with a panel of fantastic writers who are willing to talk about their works and their thoughts about steampunk, past, present, future, and retro future. So to begin with, I'm going to have each of the panelists briefly introduce themselves, and then we'll get going with questions. Katherine?
Hi, I'm Katherine Gleason. My new book is called Anatomy of Steampunk, The Fashion of Victorian Futurism. And I have a wicked echo. Hi, echo. I have written a number of books about a number of different subjects, and I really kind of got into the steampunk thing through the clothing and the fashions.
My name is Andrea Cremer. I'm the author of the Nightshade series, and this spring I have a new trilogy coming out, the first of which is called The Inventor's Secret, and it is steampunk. I have come to steampunk by way of my background. Before I became a writer, I was a historian, and so steampunk let me bring together my two great passions, which are history and fantasy.
I have several names. I write young adult steampunk as Katie Cross for Harlequintine. I'm the author of the Steampunk Chronicles. The latest book, The Girl with the Iron Touch, just came out this spring. As Kate Cross, I'm the author of 3 steampunk romances, which, if you'll pardon the pun, are fairly steamy. And as Kate Locke, I'm the author of the Immortal Empire trilogy, which is set in a world where Queen Victoria is a vampire and still on the throne. I thought it was cute. In a former life, I'm a USA Today best-selling romance novelist as well. And my husband would want me to throw that in there, so I won't. And I stumbled upon steampunk through growing up. My sister was a huge sci-fi fan and made me watch things like Star Trek and Space 1999, and I realized I'm probably dating myself. But and I loved those shows, and I loved watching them with her. And my mother was a huge Victorian nut. I mean huge. I mean, she tea-dyed ornaments for the Christmas tree. She tried putting candles on it one year. I'm like, woman, that's a real tree. So she loved all things Victoriana, so it just seemed like a natural fit. And in fact, when I pitched the Steampunk Chronicles to Harlequintine, I didn't even know it was called steampunk. I just said, I want to do these kids that are like Teen X-Men meets League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, only not quite as bleak. And it was my editor who said, okay, steampunk, cool. And then when I started looking into it, I'm like, I've loved this stuff for 20 years. I just never knew it had a name. So that's how I fell into it, and I'm so glad I did. And thank you all for coming to hear us talk about it, and for wearing your fabulous hats and your fabulous goggles. And I think we should have a contest, but that's just me.
Hi, I'm Emma Jane Holloway. I'm the author of the Baskerville Affair series. The first book is A Study in Silks, and that has just come out. The second, Study in Darkness, is coming out at the end of this month. And the third, Study in Ashes, will be out at the end of December, so you don't have to wait terribly long to find out what happens next. I came to steampunk mostly by accident. Again, I was writing it without knowing what I was writing. My degree is in English, and I love romance, I love action adventure, I love mystery, and I sort of stuffed it all into one book, and somebody said, oh, that's steampunk, and it's like, great! Finally, I've actually fallen into an actual genre without driving the marketing people crazy, so anyway, again, thank you very much for coming.
Hey, my name is Beth Ciotta, and I also write in several different subgenres in romance, but only under one name. I write contemporary, historicals, and steampunk, all under Beth Ciotta. For Penguin NAL, I'm writing a new series, the Glorious Victorious Darcys, and they created some really wonderful covers. The first novel came out just last year, end of last year, Her Sky Cowboy. And the second one is his Clockwork Canary, also a fabulous cover. And same thing, when I came up with this idea, I just had this wonderful idea for this high adventure, and I also did not know that it was steampunk. But when I described the idea to people, they said that's absolutely steampunk. And my idea is it's a time-traveling snafu that brings people from peace radicals, peace rebels from the 1960s back to the 1800s. And all of a sudden, things go wrong, and instead of bringing peace, a war breaks out, the peace war, and it changes everything, and now you have a melding of the Victorian age and the age of Aquarius.
Hi, my name is Genevieve Valentine. I am a writer of nonfiction. I've written for Tor.com, the AV Club, IO9, and I'm a novelist. My first novel, the steampunk one, is Mechanique, A Tale of the Circus Tresalti. And I think I'm the person here who knew about steampunk before she wrote about it. And a lot of this is actually a reaction to what I understood of the steampunk community and culture as I was coming up through it. And my steampunk short fiction, which appears in a couple of anthologies, does the same thing. A lot of it is a response to steampunk culture as much as part of steampunk culture itself.
Well, thank you all for your wonderful introductions. So to start off with my first question, a lot of you have already talked about how you got into steampunk and how you weren't aware of what you were doing was being defined as steampunk. So I guess it just makes sense to start off with a question about definitions. Many people in our audience, are already familiar with steampunk, and as you all know, if you ask 10 people about what they think steampunk is, you get 15 different answers. So, what is your personal definition of steampunk, in a nutshell? And anyone can start.
I get to start. I try to put it as simply as possible because any of you who have tried to describe steampunk to people who don't understand it or aren't familiar with it, I think you have all at one time gotten that look, even after you explain it. So the way I have started explaining it to people, while it may not be a completely succinct description, is I like to say it's what if the science fiction of the Victorian era had been real? And that usually at least gets people going like, oh, okay, I get it. So what if Tesla could have built, a ray gun, that kind of thing.
And feeding off of that, I also have the same problem when you're trying to explain it, and I would go on and on and on, and sometimes I would come down to saying, well, it's like the movie Wild Wild West, or like you were saying, you name the movies. But I was reading a nonfiction book about steampunk last week, and they were describing steampunk, and he said he could put it into 3 words, and he described it as Victorian science fiction. And I really liked that because I thought that was really to the point, and because mine have romance in it, I just now say Victorian science fiction with romance for myself. But I thought that really narrowed it down to kind of a nice saying.
And I also try to boil it down into a phrase, but mine is alternate history, mad scientists, gadgets, and magic.
I sort of think of it as, okay, my cappuccino maker and a pocket watch got together with my bookshelf, and it was the most fun my coffee and bleak house ever had.
How do I follow that? I just don't do anything. The way I like to talk about steampunk with people tends to be focusing on the punk aspect of it, not even necessarily the alternate history of the Victorian setting, but the fact that making it punk means that the genre itself is an attempt to sort of fight back against a lot of the social restrictions that were all over the Victorian era. And one of the things that I like best about the genre is when it pushes back. So when the technology is used to fix it or fight against what we are used to as being history.
Yeah, I like that about the punk aspect, the sort of rewriting history aspect, I think is really important, for me at least.
Great. So, I've heard, rewriting history, the fun of mishmash of different technologies, past meets present, and all of your answers. And one of the things, coming from a book perspective, that makes steampunk really fun for me is that it's so referential of 19th century literature. So, you get mentions of like Sherlock Holmes make an appearance, for example, or Frankenstein's monster, or Frankenstein himself, gets to have tea with Tesla, why not? And my next question is then, how much did 19th century books, whether they were, speculative or not, influence your take on steampunk?
For me, it's huge. Especially, if I could pick one writer to meet from history, it would probably be Mary Shelley. I adore her, and the epigraph to Inventor's Secret is from Frankenstein. So I think that writers like Shelley and then Jules Verne, they're just so imaginative, and I think, like you said, we have all of these stereotypes about the 19th century and the Victorian era, and steampunk really pushes back and reveals the radical side of things, and I think that's what's really fascinating about it.
I think that a lot of Victorian literature is characterized, especially the Victorian speculative literature, is characterized by two things happening at the same time. And one of them is, wouldn't it be so awesome if? And the other one is, wouldn't it be terrible if it malfunctioned? And so, in a lot of steampunk that I've seen, and certainly in my novel, it was half creating that same sense of wonder and like, wow, if this was possible, it would be amazing. And then at the same time, things break all the time. And when things are broken, you have a story. Like a thing that doesn't function the way it should automatically creates a setup for a story. And so I think a lot of steampunk is trying to examine that aspect of it. Like, it's amazing. Oh, shit.
This panel's now rated PG-13 for language.
If I had to pick one author, for me, it would probably be Stevenson. Jekyll and Hyde was a big thing for me because it had to do a lot with science. My background as a romance writer, and you find this kind of funny, but is I did a lot of research into that time period. So you start to read a lot about the social things that were going on. And one of the things I love about the Victorian era was that it was one of such wonder and hope, but also of great terror and change and fear. Because think about it, Darwin is actually one of my favorite. Origins of the Species is a great thing for if you're doing any steampunk research, because this is a time when people were having everything they believed in questioned. And so it was wonderful, and the Crystal Palace was going on, and all these great scientific things were being discovered, and they were learning all these new things, and that was wonderful and exciting and fascinating, but wait a second, it was changing everything that they had been taught to believe, and God, the existence of God was being challenged, and so it was wondrous and frightening at the same time, and a lot of their literature reflects that, and I find that steampunk does that at the same time with the wouldn't it be wonderful, but wouldn't it be awful if.
Yeah, I could say that sort of Victorian literature influences my series in a couple of different ways, and one is that sort of Victorian schizophrenia, which is how I think about it, is sort of the wonder and the very rational side of everything they were exploring. My main character, the heroine Ay-leen Cooper, sort of was born from one side. Her father was a circus performer. Her mother was the sister of Sherlock Holmes. So she is the niece of Holmes, and there's a very direct influence in Victorian literature because I'm basically stealing a lot of Conan Doyle's characters along the way, in a good way, I hope. But the other thing is that in that Victorian era was really the beginning of genre fiction. And, like Stevenson and John Nick Faulkner and Sheridan Le Fanu, there aren't necessarily names we know as well now as like Dickens and Thackeray and Jane Austen and so on. but they wrote very often the most wonderful adventure stories. And that's something I really like to draw on, is that sense of, you know, the Errol Flynn swinging from the chandeliers and, you know, let's go exploring. That sense of discovery is something that I think is absolutely wonderful. And I would love, you know, through steampunk, maybe some of these authors would be rediscovered, because there's a lot of great stuff there. And just like now, the people read this stuff for their everyday enjoyment. And, you know, it's a shame a lot of it's been lost.
Yeah, so, and that actually, I love all of your answers, but I feel like it's a seamless flow into my next question. You know, you just mentioned Victorian schizophrenia, and I love that phrase. And, you know, the fear and the wonder, and one of the things I find very interesting about all of your books that I've read is that there are very dark dystopian and negative elements to them, whether you know, the story is not necessarily like, you know, sad, you know, per se, but there's always this darkness to it, linked to being in this Victorian or alternate history world. On the other hand, being involved in steampunk subculture, one of the big things that I keep hearing participants say is that, oh, I'm attracted to it because it seems so hopeful. It seems like so utopian. It seems to, quote unquote, envisioning a better yesterday today. So what my question for you guys is that why do you think there is such a contrast between what we think steampunk is, like, in how we practice it, and like how we like dress up, how we build things, compared to how we think about it when we write it?
Because the victor gets the voice. I mean, a lot of Victorian England seemed like a utopia because we were hearing from the middle class, the upper middle class, the aristocracy who had the time to write things down. And you never heard about the Irish girls who had fossy jobs and working in match factories, and the people working in the cotton mills where they had the cotton fluff in their lungs and they were grateful for it because it made them full. I think one of the key aspects of the Victorian subculture as it is practiced is going to have to be understanding the history underneath the history.
Well, the Victorians were all about that whole act one way. It didn't matter what was going on behind your closed doors, because everybody knew Oscar Wilde was gay until Bosie's father decided to get involved. Everybody knew that, but as long as it was behind closed doors, it didn't matter. So as long as it was for that window dressing.
Can you just remember to speak into the mic? Sorry.
Oh,
Yeah.
window dressing. And plus, too, I think a lot of us that love the aesthetic of it as well. And I don't mean, okay, I am silly, okay, and I don't mean to necessarily completely make light. But if I came in here dressed like a poor little match girl, supposedly being a wasting away wafer, any of you gonna buy it? Because I look nothing like a poor Victorian, young, starving girl. I look pretty robust and well fed. So, very well fed. And, yeah. With pink hair. So nobody's going to buy any of that. So, but to be serious, I think that there is that dichotomy again. And I think that, you know, you are going to find people who love steampunk because they think it's fun, the dressing up and whatnot is fun. And then you're going to find people who do like the social commentary, that aspect of it. And then, and the other way around. And I think that's why it's got such a broad audience, but I think it's also the same reason why we can't pin it down. You know, and why they haven't been able to put it in a box, thank God, and there's no steampunk show on the CW yet.
Wait, Dracula comes out in like 10 days.
What?
Dracula comes out in 10 days.
Oh, I know, but
You're not allowed to forget. No one's allowed to forget that show.
We all look at our lanyards.
sorry.
One of the things I think is really interesting about kind of the optimistic yet retaining some darkness quality of steampunk books, well, one is that, you know, obviously if you have a completely happy book, it's going to be boring as hell. You know, you need conflict in your book to sustain it. But I think in terms of this definition of steampunk, one of the things that it does that's really interesting and radical is it's able to push back against the Industrial Revolution in order to make machinery beautiful and organic. There's so many steampunk creations are living things rendered as machines. and I think that bringing the organic and the mechanical together really redefines or lets us reimagine industry instead of the fact that London fog was soot. So I mean, it really makes something that is terribly ugly and that has left a legacy of damage on our planet, and is able to kind of infuse it with a possibility of what if we had done better.
Besides which, if we, I think a lot of it, speaking as just strictly as an author, a lot of it is your story goal. I mean, are you trying to write something light and funny, or are you trying to write something that's, very deep and profound? I mean, personally, I love digging into great stuff like, starvation and riots and cholera, because, as an author, it's like, that's my happy place. But not everybody, thank heavens, is going to turn out the same kind of book. So
I would say that I come from a little bit of a different angle with my series, because my Victorians, before the time travelers come back to them, they're kind of tooling along just as they were with the natural march of time. And then I've got all these time travelers, this bus that comes back from 1969 with these peace radicals that are telling them about all these atrocities of the future, like the Holocaust, the atom bomb. They're speaking like the end of the world is coming, and if you keep going like you are and things stay the same, these are the dark times that are coming. So my people are actually working to make a better tomorrow. They're trying to anyway. It's kind of working against them, but it's like the future, the people from the future brought the darkness from the future to the past, and now the people that are living it are trying to avoid that by making a better tomorrow. So it's a little bit of a different take.
I primarily have written about steampunk in nonfiction, so I'm not really sure I can talk about the utopia versus dystopia so much, but I do feel like things just feel kind of dark right now, and maybe that's why we're going that way. But I do see, the stuff I've read, I do definitely see that there's hope, and I think there's hope, especially in like the roles that women get, the roles of the heroines in the books. I think those are very hopeful.
So my next question, again, to play upon definitions, I think steampunk could be the ultimate, fruit salad, stew pot, what have you, cross-genre, as we would say in the industry, because not only is something steampunk, but it's also a steampunk mystery, or steampunk romance, or a steampunk, nonfiction book, or steampunk alternate history. And so, so to you, these authors here, you don't primarily identify yourselves as coming from, a steampunk, writer perspective, but I'm a romance writer, or I'm a YA author. So, do you consider what's the impact that being defined under this steampunk label has on you on the writer? Do you think about it at all? Do you think of it in a different way in concerning your writing and concerning how other readers may look at your work?
I feel an incredible responsibility paired with guilt towards the steampunk subculture, because I feel like they have this amazing kind of carnival train that's going down a track they built, and I just hopped on the caboose to tag along, because I have no craft skills whatsoever, and I love Maker Faire, and I love everything that is so creative and hands-on about steampunk, and I think I want them to let me play in their playground and not get mad. So I don't know if other things, because this is my first steampunk series, maybe it's not a big deal, but I always want to say, I'm trying to do something you like. I hope it compliments you, and it's not something where you're like, what is that? So I think it's really interesting, because when I first started to learn about steampunk, it is so much more complex and enormous than I realized, and so I want to make sure that I don't just say, oh, I'm going to have some machines in my book. It's that I appreciate the nuance of what it has become and is still becoming. It's just so great that it's constantly evolving and becoming more inclusive, like you said, emphasizing the punk part. Sorry, yes. Oh, sorry.
But you make books. That counts.
Yes, I make books.
I think ultimately, as a writer, your first loyalty, for lack of a better term, is to your work. I'll be honest with you, I just love to write. And if somebody came out to me tomorrow and said, do you think you could write a mystery? We'll give you, whatever. We'll give you some. We'll give you a truck full of cash for a mystery. I would try it, just because I love to write. So I think our first loyalty just has to be writing what we love. And I think you see a lot of people now, and I know a lot of people are talking about, oh, steampunk's supposed to be hot, so so-and-so's just writing steampunk. They're just taking that book and sticking gears on it to make it a steampunk book. And that's not going to work, and those are the ones that aren't going to sell and the ones that you aren't going to want to read when somebody's faking it. We're all here because, and we're all writing it however we came into it. We're writing it because we like it, and it's fun. And we'll keep writing that, or keep writing aspects of it for as long as people will buy it and read it, or we'll move on to other projects. I mean, I'm not just a steampunk author. I'm sitting here with a little tiny top hat on, but it says PAL. Because I thought it was cute. I like to write a variety of things, and steampunk is just one of them. But I think that's the bottom line, is that you've got to write it because you love it, and you're in it, and the world invites you in. And if it doesn't, then there's just no point.
Well, except a truckload of cash.
I'm still waiting for my truckload of cash.
I think there's something very attractive about, I mean, I just keep nodding because everything that everyone is saying, I just can say ditto. But I also come from, it's a little intimidating, I think, sometimes, because steampunk is such a huge and wonderful and vibrant culture. Something that I honestly was quite unaware of when I started to write my stories. So when I discovered that it was out there, it really was a little bit intimidating, because I was like, oh, good Lord, you know, there's this whole audience, these people that live and breathe and do wonderful things with the steampunk culture, and I really didn't feel like I was part of it. But I felt like in my heart that I had a story that would really resonate with people who love the genre of steampunk. And I think it's a wonderful genre because it's not really pinned down. I think someone said that before, it hasn't really been pinned down to something. Like, for instance, my books have not only steampunk qualities, but there's time travel, there's paranormal, there's historical aspects, there's just a little bit of everything, and I loved that. I think someone used the term, and I believe it was on something I saw with Tor, where they called these books sometimes genre benders, which I also thought was really great. I was like, huh, that's a really great way to describe it. But there's a sense of adventure that I think is just very appealing, and the fact that the sky's the limit. I mean, really, that's a very attractive quality to me.
I feel like steampunk is a genre that has gotten big for good reasons and also for slightly awkward and weird reasons. So there's a fantastic maker culture that I think is beautiful. I think the social aspect obviously is fascinating, probably to me the most fascinating aspect of it. At the same time, HGTV keeps trying to make steampunk happen as hard as it can, and it's always a little weird when you turn on HGTV at your mom's house and they're showing a steampunk apartment and you're like, now my mom knows. So I think that steampunk is big enough to go under that radar. Like, marketing is saying one thing, NBC's Dracula, premiering November 1st, apparently, is saying something else. No, October 25th? It's sooner than I thought.
It's at the CW,
And I'm so excited.
Me too, but this is not the CW. I mean, I love the CW.
No, they're doing Mary Queen of Scots, and that's going to be even worse. But I like that steampunk has actually gotten big enough that we can have subcultures within the subculture, so that there's no more pressure to have that sort of monoculture that can happen when it's just big enough that you want to hang on to it, but not big enough to have differences of opinion. So my favorite thing about steampunk culture in the last couple of years is the fact that we can break off and focus on different things that interest us, and hopefully have debate about it, while still maintaining the idea of the culture that is worth being on.
So, I think we've addressed this, we've kind of poked at it in all of our answers so far, but I'm just going to ask right up front that what do you think the role of politics has in steampunk?
Well, isn't that the punk part of steampunk? There is always that, I shouldn't say always, but there is very frequently a theme of rebellion. Intrinsic in steampunk. And I think that is probably for me the most fascinating part of the whole thing is looking at, the underlying social structure of the Victorian or quasi-Victorian world, and then figuring out how to blow it up. And what would that look like, and what would people's motivations be? Because I always think that artists, in some ways, are society's conscience, which is probably why their funding gets cut first. But it's a forum in which you can sort of talk about these things without being a complete and utter bore, is how I feel about it.
I think one of the most interesting aspects of politics and steampunk is actually happening in the publishing houses and on bookshelves and bookstores.
Do tell.
Well, I will. I've seen a lot more steampunk that is coming from voices other than the standard. I'm hearing about a steampunk book set in the Belgian Congo, which I can't wait for. I'm seeing steampunk about First Nations peoples. I'm seeing it written by people of color, people from the cultures that are being written about, so that they're having a chance to reframe the historical within their own stories. And I'm seeing what I hope is a groundswell of support for those authors, because I think that the political issues are framed differently depending on who's writing them, and I think that to some degree there's no way out of that. And I really enjoy reading steampunk that comes from a different place, that shows me something I hadn't thought of, and that positions in the center of the stories people to whom it matters most.
I have to say, I'm the least political person I know. I mean, seriously. I'm a shut-in that talks to 5 cats all day and gets all her news off Facebook. And I'll admit that in front of all of you. But I do think in my own work, it's not so much a political aspect, even though I do write about particular governments and things like that. I find I'm more interested in maybe religious politics of the time. I'm more interested in how some of these things, and how science and maybe monstrosities and automatons and strange scientific things, Island Dr. Moreau, I'm more interested in how that challenges people's faith and belief more than in a political kind of structure. But I think that again, that's one of those duality things of steampunk. It's that high and low, hope, no hope. And it does have some kind of aspect of social change.
The political question that I really try to address in my steampunk, I'm a very ardent feminist, so I always do gender politics. That's just, I won't write a book where I'm not talking about that. But I really went after class in this novel because it was very important to me to think about the social structures of privilege and access and the means for control in an empire, especially. So I was really interested to try to make it very layered in terms of the different classes that were populating my novel.
I did something similar with the Darcys, with speaking of cultural and political things. When I was doing research about the Victorian times and then also research in the 1960s, which for me the 1960s have always been very fascinating. And when I was doing the research about both periods, I found that there were a lot of things that were very similar about the way things were in Victorian times and also in the 1960s. And as I was writing this, it seemed very natural, and it came very naturally, that equal rights and civil rights come into these stories. And just as it was in the 1960s with civil rights, I have, they're called the freaks, they're a paranormal race in this book, and they are battling in Victorian times for equal rights. And so it kind of all came together, and it is kind of very political, and it's about tolerance, but I felt that I could do it in a way that wasn't very preachy. It just goes with the story, and I've never been able to do that really with any of my contemporary works. I'm not normally very outspoken politically, but it just really fit with this, and it felt good to do. And it was, I thought, one of the most powerful and some of the hardest scenes that I wrote in these books, but I really appreciated the chance to do it.
And I don't know if you, Katherine, but I was curious about like the non-fiction aspect. And I don't know if you had any thoughts to contribute from that end, looking at the subculture, looking at what you kind of read to do with steampunk. So.
I mean, to me, I think anything that's looking at alternate history is inherently political, and I'm kind of like, oh gosh. I'm kind of like, if, is that this way? Okay, sorry. Yeah, I mean, it seems to me that it is just inherently political if you're going to look at the past, and you know, I really like this, like, you know, creating a better, what is it? They get it backwards. Envisioning a better yesterday today, you know, and to me that's like what it's all about. And you know, if you're gonna do that, why not make it a more just and equitable society? And I just, you know, I think that since so many of us are women, and so many of the books I've read, the protagonists are women, you know, that would be like kind of huge, because like if we were all in the Victorian times, we wouldn't be here. And actually, most of us would be dead, honestly. You know, we wouldn't be here really at all. So I think it's kind of enormous politics.
And I personally find it fascinating that the woman question is a big question in the Victorian era, and look at this panel, we're all female identified, and coming from just fandom and sci-fi in general, I've been in fandoms where the women aren't as prominent, or at least as recognized, as creators, as participants. I don't know where that's coming from, sorry. As much as steampunk has really embraced sort of like gender equality, and having so many women involved and active and visible is actually very refreshing to me as a fan. So why do you think that is in steampunk?
Well, I think it goes back to that, what we were talking about, the punk aspect of it, right? Obviously, as women writers, it's the plight of women is something that we're interested in. But looking at the Victorian era, they were another culture, subculture that was put down. I mean, chances are most of us wouldn't have been even able to read that well if we were Victorian women, and we probably would have died having a kid 20 years ago. Or something else would have killed us, or we'd be locked up for hysteria or whatever. It was a real fun time. So I think it just makes sense that's one of those things when you're working and writing about something and you're wanting to change up the society. One of the first things you do is you start going for the people that were oppressed, and you start building them up. And so it's wonderful to go ahead and shake those things up and have women scientists and women doctors. And I'll tell you, this is a little aside, but in one of my books, I write about teenagers, right? So I got a fan letter. Well, and I use the word fan loosely. She was very upset with me, very upset that the female protagonist was left alone with a young man in his home. She was also very upset that said young female wore trousers. And my response was, but you were okay with the killer robots. Just so I'm clear, you didn't think that other stuff would have worked in that time and age, but you're okay with mechanical horses and automatons doing your laundry. Okay, we're good, just so I know. So, you know, I think that's just an example of somebody not thinking that, you know, those changes are great, or maybe just not getting what steampunk was all about. But I think the fact that it is great for women is fabulous.
Yeah, if you tip the mics a bit down.
If you tip the mics down a smidge,
They won't echo as much.
They won't echo as much.
Thank you.
For my part, I think besides the clothes, I mean, you can't go wrong with that, but the other appeal of steampunk sort of for women, I think part of it might be due to the fact that although all the elements have been around for a while, as steampunk is a fairly newish genre. So we have the absolute freedom to sort of start new traditions, start out fresh. So why not? And I mean, the fact that you can have everyone from, a duchess to an aeronaut as your characters, it's a very equal opportunity and it's wide open.
I think the 19th century itself was an explosion of literature written by women about women. A lot of the women that we know of before that were written by men. So it was an era of women speaking for themselves right before they got locked up for hysteria and died of conception while having a baby. And I think a lot of that same thing is happening here. Science fiction literature tends to be skewed toward men. If women write it, it's social science fiction or soft science fiction. We're trying to be science fiction. And I think that steampunk was a place that women who wanted to write about technology could do so without having to fight against that pre-existing prejudice. And I think a lot of the reason that women are writing a lot of steampunk is because it's that same space that they're trying to make for themselves in the genre.
Yes, thank you all for your answers on that. So, if you want to give one or two pieces of advice to anyone in our audience out here today who wants to write about steampunk, whether it be fiction or nonfiction, what would it be?
Go to a con and hang out.
Have a day job.
So true. I think my one piece of advice, God, that's so true. My one piece of advice would be, for me, it was all about knowing why my world was, how did it come to be? How did my world come to be? I had to know that. When I had that idea of crossing the 1800s with the 1960s, I had to figure out how that happened. And once I did, everything else kind of came from there. So for me, it would be figure out what your world is and how it came to be, and then everything should flow from there.
I would say don't try to write to market. Remember that whatever book you've picked up here, you got a freebie. Let's say you picked up a wonderful little book called God Save the Queen. That's my book. That book came out a year and a half ago. But let's say you pick up a book. Well, that book may be wonderful now and what's publishing now, and you see what people are publishing now. But if you sell your book tomorrow, your book's not going to be out for about another year. So what's hot right now may not be what's hot a year from now. And I know that people are always telling you, oh, write what you love. Write the book of your heart. Well, you don't have to write the book of your heart, but I think you should write something that you're really going to want to invest yourself in a world that you don't mind coming back to several thousand times, because you will. Because you'll be told to edit it and revise it and edit it again, and here are some copy edits, and by the way, here are some galleys, make sure everything's spelled right. So my advice would be, don't write what you think you should be writing, and don't write what you think people might want to read. Write what you want to write, and if it happens to be steampunk, that's groovy.
Okay, so this is I'm putting my history professor hat on. I think you should the 19th century, both in terms of its literature and philosophy. There's really interesting, as was already mentioned, this is a time of incredible cultural debate, and it's really a fascinating historical era to steep yourself in. And you don't even, I decided I really wanted to write an alternate history, so that it was a primary focus of my book, but I think the more you can inform yourself of the way things were, the more you are aware of how you are changing it, diverting from it, what aspects you want to keep, and of course, one of the great things about steampunk is you can completely, radically do something different. But I think because it does draw on the past, it is good to know something about that past, even if you completely change it.
I would also just add, like, write a lot and read a lot, and maybe turn off the TV, but write a lot.
Watch the CW.
So my final question for you guys is entirely your opinion, entirely speculation, sci-fi, why not? Where do you see steampunk as a genre, or as a community, or both, going in the next 5 years?
I would say wherever it wants to. And I just really, the one wish I have for the genre as a whole is that it does not become, hamstrung by, shoulds. And so I hope it maintains the, sort of free sense of exploration it has now.
I like that, what you just said. I also, for me, it's like I'm really fascinated by the maker culture, and I'd really like to see a more widespread base of people with skills to make stuff, because it's so much fun. And like, it's not that hard to make stuff. Like, you can do it and screw things up and try again.
Will you teach me? I want to make stuff.
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Yeah, Katherine made that. Audience
It's awesome.
There's directions in my book for how to make it. It's not so hard. It's all within
I think you brought up diversity. I think that would be really cool to explore other locations and diverse voices to address this kind of the steampunk realm. I think that would be really, really cool.
I'd like to see some Canadian steampunk. I'm Canadian, seriously. Send me some Canadian steampunk, eh?
From Victoria, BC.
Are you? Why not? Of course.
I have no clue.
And I'm going to set a steampunk TV series on a major network, but literally the future is a week from today.
I just hope it keeps going. I just hope it keeps going and it keeps evolving.
So wait, I have to ask a question. The new Dracula is not just Victorian, it's steampunk Dracula?
It's steampunk. He pretends he invented electricity.
Oh! that didn't get to me in the marketing campaign.
Now you're actually going to watch.
I will.
I don't know if I'm thrilled or terrified. I'm sorry.
Then why didn't they just make a show about Tesla and make him a vampire?
Because Tesla is never getting credit for anything unless we write it ourselves.
I'm on it.
For sanctuary. All right, so we have a few minutes left, and I'd like to open up the panel to the audience. So if any audience members have any questions, awesome. First, the one in the tall red hat in the back.
What's your favorite thing about steampunk?
The question is, what's our favorite thing about steampunk?
For me, it's a tie between creating I really love creating machines that look like animals. I just think that is so much fun. I just think that it's that combination of organic and metallic leather. I just think that there's so many different elemental qualities to steampunk that I think allows you to create a collage in your settings and in your characters that is unique and different than other things. So I really love all of those components. So I guess there is kind of a maker component to putting that stuff together. So
I would say it's the sense of play. Like, let's stick these things together and see what happens. And, just sheer inventiveness and energy. I mean, if, we could bottle it and put it in the refrigerator, it would be better than meat cracks.
And for me, it's the cool gadgets and gizmos and all that kind of stuff. I liked making stuff up. I made a lot of stuff up in this book, and so that's really fun. And of course, the clothes. Clothes are fun. That's fun.
I think for me, it's the fact that the self-referential quality of steampunk has allowed me to rediscover a lot of Victorian literature that I didn't hear about in school, and so I've gotten to discover some authors that are less prominent. I've gotten to examine some things like the London exhibition of 1851 that I didn't know very much about, except that it happened, and examining footnotes that steampunk brings up, I think, is really great.
I would say my favorite thing about steampunk is the incredible creativity of the community, which we see here in you guys' fabulous outfits and hats and other cool stuff that I'm kind of scoping various people's hats out right now, and I'm like, wow!
It's a very fine hat. I was going to say something very similar, except I was going to phrase it like I'm going to suck up to all of you and tell you how much I love you. My books are for sale after. I think that's what it boils down to. Every steampunk event I go to, I mean, you're always going to have your elitists and your people who think that they know everything that there is to know about steampunk, which strikes me as funny because steampunk, as we know, never really happened as an era. But anyway, I love meeting all these people that are having fun with it and accepting everybody. I don't think I've ever seen a more accepting community. It doesn't matter what color you are, if you have physical or maybe mental disabilities or obstacles to overcome. It doesn't matter what sex you are. Nobody cares. What it is it's everybody coming together because they love the movement, they love steampunk, and for me that just sums the whole thing up. I mean, I love the fact that I can sit here in my little comic book hat and really not, I'm not really wearing anything that's of the genre, and and you're wearing a baseball cap, and he's wearing a very fine furry thing, and there's a witch hat back there, and Jenny Weasley? Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, well, we've got Harry Potter people here, and we've got witches here, and this lady over here with this purple thing on her head, which is fabulous, and the TARDIS hat. And I'm rambling, I know, but we're all here because we love steampunk, and no two of us look alike at all. And I think that's just fabulous. So I hope we just keep on going. There's your age of Aquarius.
Right. So, person in the light blue shirt? Yes.
I was really interested to hear your comments about diversity in the authors, because that's not something I've come across so far. And one of my struggles with steampunk as a reader has been authors I would otherwise really enjoy, but there's a huge theme of colonialism, imperialism, and acceptance of that in the books that I just can't read that author anymore. And I see a lot of that. And so I'm curious if there's a discussion among writers about how that aspect needs more of a punk of life to it. The colonialism of the Victorian era needs to be pushed back against. Honestly, that's really offensive.
I smell an anthology.
There are some. I would actually point you to Ay-leen the Peacemaker's blog. Her entire blog is dedicated to exactly that idea. And while it is a conversation among writers, I think that it's crucial that it become a conversation among readers, because what they buy dictates what the market wants to put out.
And as a moderator, I'm not usually supposed to comment about questions, but since you kind of plugged me, a couple of things I'd like to point out. Anne Vandermeer came out with an anthology, Steampunk Revolutions. It's full of short stories with, mostly philosophical writers of color and from the sci-fi community, and it does address, colonialism, imperialism as aspects. But I think all of her editorial work and the work of her husband, Jeff Vandermeer, definitely addresses those aspects in their steampunk anthologies. I also want to point out Steampunk World. We have cards for that up here. It is an anthology currently in the works. It's edited by Sarah Hans, and she is specifically looking for steampunk stories that are set outside of Victorian England. And she has a preference for writers of color and for protagonists of color for this anthology in particular. So if you're interested, please come up and grab a card at the end of the panel. But anyone else have anything to add? All right, next question. Give me the time. The purple.
My roommate and I were having a nostalgic moment this week. We rewatched Chitty Chitty Bang. I realized that steampunk has always existed. Why do you think it blew up now? Why do you think it's such a thing now if it's always existed?
I think that some of the things that, well, wait, I was gonna say, oh gosh, I don't know. Yeah, I'm thinking, I keep asking myself the same question, because for me it was like when I was okay, I'm gonna totally date myself. I'm 9,000, but you know, the original Wild Wild West. You know, there was that, and it was so cool, and I would be like, oh my God, this is so cool. What is it? And then it keeps cropping up. But I think that maybe some of the, I don't know, cultural anxieties, to use a term I'm not so crazy about, that we're having now are maybe similar to some of the stuff that was going on in Victorian times. I mean, because we are looking at technology and the role of the individual and, you know, us versus machine. And I think that those, you know, I think a lot of us are worrying about that. And we love our computers, but it's a little scary too.
And I think we've been able to find each other a little bit easier too. I mean, we're living in an era now where, you know, of course, we're writing or reading books about people inventing the computer or whatever, or Ethernet, you know. But that's exactly it. It's still a small movement, despite all of us here. It's still not, you know, very well known. I was at a book event earlier this week with a bunch of librarians and whatnot, and I said something about steampunk, and somebody just looked at me and they had that look, you know, that deer in the headlights look, and they didn't know what I was talking about. So it still hasn't gone mainstream, and I know there's a lot of us that are happy for that, right? But I think the thing is now it's easier for us to find each other. We find the videos on YouTube, we're finding the bands because they're getting exposure because of the internet, and then we're finding the makers because we're doing research on things, and then we're finding these people, and they're finding us. And I think that's really part of it, whereas before maybe it wasn't so easy to find other people that were interested in the movement. Just a thought.
So we have time for one more question, and yes, in the hat. Yes.
So actually kind of in reference to what you were just mentioning about how the market is still rather small, the impact of something like the Inventor versus the Bible shop.
Sorry.
Would you really consider it still small though, since that game alone has made over $1 billion?
Yeah, because I wonder how many people that have played it would have actually said, oh, it's steampunk, and would have just said, oh, this looks funky.
I think everybody would say
Really?
it's on steampunk.
Then cool.
And Telson, yes, I was still cool then.
Don't get me started on Edison Man. Elephant killer. Look, if I could time travel. Take Edison out. He's the guy's gonna get punched in the face with my ray gun. My Tesla ray gun.
Another question is, what something like as large as what kind of impact do you think that would have on this, you know, what is normally considered as
I would like to think it would have a big one because, I mean, their stuff looks fabulous, right? So if any game is going to have an impact and introduce steampunk to some people who maybe might not have seen it before, I would certainly hope it would be one that looks that gorgeous and is that fun. But I'm not quite sure because I'm thinking maybe a lot of the people that would have bought the game would have already been aware too and already know of it. So, oh, it's BioShock Infinite. That's what we're talking about. It's gorgeous, gorgeous game. So I'm wondering if it's hitting any new people. I would be really interested in finding out.
And actually, sorry, but I think this would be a great hallway discussion. I'm honestly really interested because I have very very interesting thoughts about the role of video games in visual culture. But for now, we have to wrap up the panel. I want to thank all the panelists for sharing their views.
Thank you.
We will have an autograph session. session where you can discuss, Bioshock and Fallout and everything much more in depth. It's Autograph Table 21. So we're all going to head there right now. You can talk to the authors, you can buy copies of their books, and I'll see you guys there.